What's up, everybody, and welcome to Fantasy Football Today, DFS. It's our early look at Week 7, the main slate, and a quick look back at the Week 6 slate. I've got the FFT DFS winner. We are going to showcase that at the end of the show, and one of my tournament lineups that honestly could have hit really big. I just needed a little bit more from Gardner Minshew. I guess that's a lot to ask, ultimately. FYI, the FFT DFS link will be in the YouTube description. It may be in the chat in a little bit, and it certainly will be in the podcast description as well. So make sure you sign up for that. It's just $5. Really fun contest. And of course, we always showcase the winner. Meg, how you doing today? No London game. I'm kind of happy about that.
Yeah, no, it's fun to mix up the international games and have some, but when it's weeks in a row, yeah, it's a nice little break. So I'm doing well and ready to talk about another week here. You know, this always helps my process and getting started.
That's right. Getting started early. There's nothing wrong with that. We do have a lot of buys, by the way. We don't have a London game, but we certainly have a lot of buys. The Panthers, Bengals, Cowboys, Texans, Jets, Titans, just, that's 6 teams right there on a buy. So keep that in mind. We have 10 games on the main slate. And it's an interesting slate, right? Because we don't have a lot of the high flying teams are either on a bye, like let's say the Bengals and the Cowboys, for example, or they're the Sunday night or Monday night or Thursday night game. I actually like these
huge
slates,
Sunday night game, right? Yeah,
right.
Yeah,
I like these slates where there's not necessarily there's an obvious game to choose from on the main slate, but I like slates where there's not necessarily like 2 or 3 like showcase high flying games because it makes it harder, which I kind of like. What's your opinion on that?
100% agree with you on that. I don't like the slates where you feel like almost pressure to have to jam in from 1 or 2 games. And yes, we'll talk about it. A couple games are definitely more attractive than others, but I'm with you. I prefer these type of slates for sure.
And for the record, we're seeing totals like pretty low, but I do want to point out that unders last week in week 6, we were, I believe, including yesterday's game, I think it was 2-12-1 to unders. Like unders were coming in. So just keep that in mind. I don't know if that's because of offensive injuries combined with weather and things of that nature, but unders really came in, including last night, of course, in that allegedly high flying Chargers Cowboys game. So again, something to keep in mind. You might see some lower totals because that's going to be an adjustment. And frankly, we don't have any high totals other than that Chargers Chiefs game, which is now down from, I believe, 51-49. The other games that are even in the conversation of medium are the Lions, Ravens, Cardinals, Seahawks, Packers, Broncos. Those are like 44.5, 45. Everything else is lower than that, which I think is really interesting. Meg, of those games I mentioned, is there 1 or 2 that you love? I mean, obviously the Chargers Chiefs have to be involved, right?
Yeah, it's definitely a Chargers Chiefs is obviously my favorite. I think we've seen a lot of their games historically kind of shootout. So that one is the one I'm drawn to the most. But I'd say the second one is the Lions Ravens. Those are 2 teams that I think can punch back with each other. And, I have loved the Lions offense all off season and they're really showing it, but they're showing that they can be, play in all 3 phases, which made them interesting last week. But, Goff was, I believe, QB1 last week. So, I mean, this is a team we want to kind of target and hopefully Baltimore can kind of push back. So I like that game as well.
Yeah, let's actually bring up the QBs. And I like what you said. I like that terminology of like punching back. I do think Detroit and Baltimore are 2 pretty good teams. I mean, hopefully Baltimore's efficiency is a little bit better, particularly in the red zone, because they should have beaten the Titans by like 20 points. And the Titans actually almost backdoor covered that game. They probably should have. Ultimately.
Exactly.
We have Lamar Jackson up here at 7,600. That makes a lot of sense. I obviously like him. Are we at the very top? So scroll to the top there so we can capture Mahomes, who I believe is at 8,300. There we go. Patrick Mahomes, 8,300. Justin Herbert, 8,000. Listen, I'm not going to argue with anybody who wants to stack those 2. We'll talk about how to stack that in a second. Lamar Jackson, I like. I think Matthew Stafford is interesting at 6,500. I'm still not sure what to expect out of this Steelers defense. Jared Goff, always interesting. He's shown that on the road he can succeed too, and he does have his full complement of pass catchers. We had a scare with your boy, Meg Laporta, but he ended up playing.
He is my guy.
Amon-Ra is back. I mean, we're not going to have David Montgomery, but it does look like Jahmyr Gibbs might be back. So it's just an interesting game. I think Geno Smith is interesting at 6,000, and I'll stop there and maybe get your comment of maybe some people that you like 6,000 and above. But Geno is really frustrating. I was 2-1 on official picks this week. 2 were props. 1 was a side. The side I had was the Seahawks +3. And watching Geno Smith in the fourth quarter, in the fourth quarter with his I mean, his efficiency was just so terrible. It was
Right.
so bad in the fourth quarter. They really should have won that game outright. But who do you like 6,000 and above?
Yeah, I'd say 6,000 and above. My favorites are from the games we mentioned and kind of like saving. So I'm going to take Herbert, the cheaper option in that game, and I'm going to take Goff, the cheaper option in that game. Just because we got to save salary somewhere. And yes, I understand probably Mahomes, or definitely Mahomes and Lamar Jackson offer that better kind of floor ceiling combo in general. But I really think obviously Herbert and Goff have the firepower and weapons to put up, some big 303 type numbers, even though they don't offer as much, rushing, especially. So yeah, I'd say I'd go for the cheaper options in those games are my favorite in that.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's go down to like that 5,000 range, right below. By the way, do you think you're going to get? Let's say you're playing 3 stacks. Do you think Jared Goff or Geno Smith make it in? Let's say that 3rd stack.
Yeah, I'd say that I would probably decide between. I'd even maybe throw Stafford in there. I think with Cup back, a 303 game is coming. Again, he offers nothing on the ground as well either, but the Steelers pass rush is obviously something to fear, but I think he can attack the secondary. So I'd even throw Stafford in there too. I'd say, yes, they'd be in that mix as like a 3rd quarterback if I'm doing 3 stacks for sure.
Yeah. And I'll note, Meg, that Kyron Williams looks like he's going to be out. I'm not sure about Rivers' status. So
I believe he is out as well. I believe.
Yeah. So what are we looking at? Zach Evans?
Looking at Zach Evans and possibly Royce Freeman being brought up. Both min price. We'll get to that, but yeah, so that might make them a little more pass heavy. The McVay is tough for me to trust. I've been burned by trying to trust the coach speak of McVay. So I need to be careful about that. But yeah, maybe, that might be, I don't know if those running backs end up chalky, but maybe doing a Stafford stack could be a way to get off, kind of a contrarian way to get off.
Yeah. I like that. I mean, we saw Nakua, he didn't get a lot of looks, but we got a price break with Nakua this week, which we'll see in a second. And obviously Cup is very much in play. It's a pretty condensed target share. So Stafford makes a ton of sense against Pittsburgh. Anybody in this 5K range that you like? I mean, we saw Desmond Ridder flash last week. I'm not really interested there. I think Joshua Dobbs at 5,300 is actually kind of interesting because you can pass against the Seattle defense, although they really did flash against the Bengals in the second half specifically. Where's Tyrod Taylor? Oh, he's at the bottom there at 5,100. If the weather is okay in that game, which it might not be, I think Tyrod at 5,100, he had a lot of touch on those deep balls. I was actually really impressed. In Washington, of all teams, we just saw them give it up to Desmond Ridder. They give it up to pretty much everybody, including Justin Fields 2 weeks ago. So I kind of like that. Any sort of value guys you like here?
Yeah, unfortunately, Washington secondary is definitely one to attack. Yeah, I hear you on the Tyrod play, and that is a consideration for me. I actually have been surprised with Ridder he's gotten over 300 two games in a row. So he's a consideration for me. And I'll even throw in Sam Howell as well. For Washington, it really just depends on the game script. I mean, if the week before, obviously there was issues on the defensive end where Washington has to throw 50 times. Last week, he only threw 23 times. So if he's in a game where he has to throw more or use his legs to scramble more, then he's definitely viable. The problem is it's going to be very game script dependent for Howell.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll note that before we go over to running backs, Hoyer's down there, and it looks like he's going to play as opposed to, I shouldn't say that. It could be Aiden O'Connell, but I don't think Jimmy G is going to play in this Chicago game. Badgent is the backup for Chicago. I'm sure nobody's heard of him. He looked okay after his first drive wasn't very good, but because he fumbled, but he looked okay. So if he's the starter, I don't know if the weather's here's the thing, this Vegas Chicago game and the Washington New York Giants game, which is at New York, both of them have some weather implications, especially the Giants game where I'm seeing some higher winds and some rain, whereas the Chicago game right now I'm seeing just moderate winds and just normal temperature, 50 degrees. So that one should be fine. But let's wait to hear what we see in terms of the practice reports when it comes to Brian Hoyer, Aiden O'Connell, or Badgent, because at 4,900 against those defenses, I don't hate it. I just played Gardner Minshew at a flat 5K, and honestly, if he just had, he wasn't even good, but if he was decent,
he wasn't.
I would have smashed because, again, I was able to fit in so many pieces, which we're about to take a look at. But
absolutely.
Speaking of taking a look at things, let's take a look at running backs. But before we do that, let's hear a message from our partners.
This Saturday, it's back to back to back college football.
Into the end zone. What a throw, unreal.
It all starts at noon on CBS Sports Network.
A lot of running backs to like this week, by the way. I'm a big fan of some of the high-priced running backs, which is usually not my typical thing. I mean, you know, me and Mike McClure on our game-by-game preview, we're trying to pay up for the receiver position specifically, but it is hard to resist. It's going to be hard to get Austin Eckler in your lineup. But I mean, it's really hard to resist Austin Eckler. He certainly came off a bad game from a rushing standpoint. But listen, that Cowboys rush defense is really good. I really like the Chargers even attempting to rush with Eckler in the second half, even late in the first half. I was like, y'all are just wasting downs at this point. It's just not going to go anywhere. But Chiefs, a formidable defense, don't get me wrong. But I do think Eckler is going to have a little bit more running room against the Chiefs defense. Certainly, we know the pass catching prowess. So I like Eckler. I think Barkley is going to end up being a contrarian play. So I don't hate him because, again, anybody can explode against Washington. Literally anybody. and we know Barkley is likely going to get force-fed somewhere between, 18 and 24 touches altogether. So I like him. I like Josh Jacobs, of course, against Chicago. That makes a lot of sense. We go down. We know Kyron Williams is out. Kenneth Walker, he had a good game, not a great game last week, but certainly a good game. And he has a nice matchup this week going against Arizona. So I like a lot of these guys up at the top. Anybody at the top that you like, Meg?
Yeah, you make a great point about the very top with Eckler and Barkley. They're definitely going to be consideration. It's just going to kind of come down to, can I afford them at the end? And do I prioritize them over probably receivers that we talk about later? But I like them. Probably my favorites price considered in this range are Josh Jacobs and Kenneth Walker. Just love the spots for both of them. And then you're saving a little off those bigger price tags. So I'd say those are my favorite up top, just because of a little bit of savings, but I still think they have the upside.
Yeah, and then we can go right to let's look at 6,800 and below. We see Aaron Jones there at the top. I mean, listen, it's hard to gauge what his health is going to be, but you're playing at Denver in a game where they're going to try to protect Jordan Love by running the ball with your best running back and also a pass catching running back. If Aaron Jones is healthy, which is such a big if when it comes to these soft tissue injuries, it is it's really, really tough because not only are you worried about whether they're going to be ready, you're worried about whether they've tested themselves enough not to re-aggravate their injury, or I should say aggravate their injury in the middle of the game. So it's a risk, but I think it's a risk worth taking if he practices in full this week. Really like him at Denver. I think that's an interesting game to stack, by the way. And I don't hate a Russell Wilson stack necessarily, or at least I don't hate taking pieces from that game, maybe multiple pieces or one or two on each side, I think could make sense. Let's wait on that one. Isaiah Pacheco at home against the Chargers. I mean, that makes a ton of sense. 6,100 is tremendous value. I'll note that I think Ramondre Stevenson at home against Buffalo, I don't hate it. Buffalo's defense is really ravaged. And if New England wants to have any wins in the win column, I think you got to run the ball. I really think you got to run the ball. So anybody in this range, we'll get to value in a second. Anybody you like here? And by the way, Jahmyr Gibbs, he might be back. He might not be.
Right. Yeah. As far as Jahmyr Gibbs, if he is back, I still think the price is a little too high for me, even though obviously, he would stand out above Craig Reynolds and the other options for Detroit. I just would probably lean more to their pass game. Just again, worrying about where he's at. So I like a lot of the guys you mentioned, honestly, but my favorite probably in this range is Isaiah Pacheco, because it's a way to get exposure to that Chiefs Chargers game without having to pick a Chiefs receiver. Obviously Kelsey's very expensive. We'll get to that later, but I really like Pacheco, and they targeted him a good bit. He's been seeing more and more usage every week. And I like that he got more targets last week too.
Yeah, I like that. I think a lot of people are going to be interested in that. And honestly, it's a good way to build where you're not necessarily stacking Mahomes, or maybe you're not even stacking Herbert because, listen, you think it's too expensive and you want to be a little contrarian. But again, you're getting pieces of this game, and Isaiah Pacheco certainly would be a piece to get, especially at 6,100. I mean, listen, he could absolutely explode against the Chargers. So let's scroll down a little bit. There weren't a lot of value guys that I was interested in. You mentioned Craig Reynolds. We'll have to kind of wait and see how the week goes on that. We'll have to wait and see on the Rams running back. We see Jerome Ford here at 5,100. He's certainly got a lot of work, and the Indianapolis matchup isn't terrible. The problem is Kareem Hunt also he didn't get a decent amount of work. Ford got way more, but Kareem Hunt is certainly a thorn in Jerome Ford's side. I don't know that I want to be involved in that one specifically, but I don't hate it. Craig Reynolds, as we see here, 4,900. we see Keontae Ingram here. Like, I don't know what's going on with the Arizona backfield, and I'm not willing to guess on a Tuesday morning. Anybody in the value range, SCT Marcado down there, which I know a lot of people played him. That certainly didn't work out. I think he had 2 rush attempts and maybe 1 catch on the entire game. Anybody in the value range? I know it's early and things are going to open up, but anybody you like in the value range?
Yeah, in the value range, I would say I'm not looking to guess on the Arizona situation. I don't really like Craig Reynolds. I tried that experience a couple of weeks ago. It did not work. Foreman got the usage last week, so we got to see the status of Rashawn Johnson. If he is still the guy, he got the usage. He just didn't get a touchdown and just didn't break 100 yards. So I'd be willing to go back to Foreman if he was the only guy. I'd also be willing to go back. I mentioned Gus Edwards last week. He got 16 carries. I mean, he's not getting a ton of targets. I'd have to look into usage further if he's getting those like high leverage situations at the goal line enough. But I mean, at that 16 carries at that price, I think that's a consideration. And then I will say the Rams situation is one I want to monitor closely this week. Again, Coach Speak from Sean McVay has burnt me in the past, but I'm willing to get hurt again. No, I'm willing to listen and see if it sounds like Zach Evans is going to be the main guy. If he is at 4K, I mean, again, he could be very chalky, but we'll see what plays out for the Rams running back situation, but I'm willing to take a shot or at least pay attention to that this week.
Yeah. And you mentioned Rashawn Johnson, who by the way is 4,600. I mean, listen, if he's going to be the starter against Vegas like that, like he's a dude, like that's not just some like plotting running back. Like unfortunately Deontay Foreman is now. Like Rashawn Johnson could have a big game. And remember, it's a concussion with him. It's not some soft tissue injury that we really have to worry about. He's been in the protocol for quite some time. So I would imagine he's going to be cleared, if not like I don't know when the practice reports come out, probably tomorrow on Roshan. We'll know whether he's a full go or not. And I expect that to be the case. So some good value there.
Then I like that, because especially with that backup quarterback situation, you know, Fields obviously vultures from the running backs, right? So like in the backup quarterback situation, I would be more interested in the Chicago running backs. And you got to think they're going to have to lean on them more.
Yeah, absolutely. Great point on that. All right. So we're going to turn to receivers, but before we do, we have one more message from our partners.
The Scudetto, where the soul of Italy meets the pinnacle of calcio. Catch Serie A on CBS Sports Network and streaming live on Paramount Plus.
We are back on Fantasy Football Today, DFS. Make sure if you're watching us live on YouTube, you hit the like button. I see in here Lori Moore, Reed Thompson. How do I pronounce that? Sites 501, I believe. He says, what's the running back situation with the Lions? We'll have to wait and see. It looks, my guess is Jahmyr Gibbs is going to be active and Craig Reynolds is going to be active. Of course, David Montgomery is not going to be active for probably, I'm going to guess like 3 to 4 games. That's just like
probably after their week 9 bye, I believe. Would be my guess. I think I think that's what a lot of fans, I think that's what a lot of us best ball people are hoping, that like, okay, hopefully it's just a couple weeks. And after week 9, he comes back week 10 is the hope.
Rib cartilage, certainly it's just an interesting injury. Justin Herbert had that. He played through it last year, but he probably shouldn't have. And he's a quarterback. It's a little different. It still hurts, but it's a little different than a running back, in my opinion. Reed Thompson, do y'all still play cash games? Yes, we do. And we'll try to focus on that in the game-by-game preview on Friday at 11 o'clock, so pay attention to that. And Lori Moore, lots of buys, lots of injuries, question mark, exclamation point. That's an accurate statement. Lori, by the way, have you reviewed the podcast yet? Because I remember you being in here a couple weeks ago. Big fan of Megan Schaub. Definitely review the podcast if you can. All right, let's look at receivers. Cooper Kupp, well, he's good. 9,500. That's not so good. I mean, that's a really expensive price. So you're just going to have to, like Stafford's reasonable at 6,500. But if you're playing Stafford Kupp, you have to ask yourself, okay, is that stack better than from a value standpoint? And again, we'll talk about this on the game by game preview. Is it better than what I would have with Justin Allen, or I should say Justin Herbert and Keenan Allen? So you kind of have to weigh the points per dollar there in terms of like what is actually the best scenario. I like Keenan Allen a lot, obviously. Kansas City's been okay against receivers, but this is a different story. Keenan Allen's just getting so many targets. Amon-Ra St. Brown, I think, is interesting. He won a lot of people a lot of money in DFS if you were willing to play him against the Bucs last week. Puka Nacua, we get a little bit of a price break. I mean, he was 8,000 last week. He's 7,600 now. Not much of a price break, but I kind of like it. DK Metcalf, 6,800. I'd probably be more willing to pay down for Tyler Lockett. But if we scroll back up there, Meg, who are you interested in terms of like this top tier?
I do think it is Kupp for me at the very top. And yes, the price is so high and you have to think through the points per dollar. But on a slate like this, we also have to think, I think there's only a handful of potential slate breakers. And I think he's obviously one of them. Obviously, it also could be a spot could this be a pay up to be contrarian? We'll find out later in the week when ownership projections are accurate and everything. But if it becomes like a pay up to be contrarian and he's got that like slate breaking ability, obviously, I would prioritize them actually. So I actually really like Kupp and Allen the most at the top. And then I also like Amon-Ra St. Brown a ton. I'm very bullish on this Lions offense. And again, like that Detroit-Baltimore game. So I'd say those are my three favorite at the top.
I love all three of those. I mean, I think if you can fit two of those three in your cash
yes.
games, the only way you'd really be able to do that is if, in my opinion, is probably you're not necessarily stacking it in your cash games. You're paying down at quarterback and paying down for like a value receiver and running back, and then you'll be able to fit those two. And I think you'd be hard pressed to get. You could do it, but getting Stafford to Kupp or Justin Herbert to Keenan Allen, I don't think you have to do that in your cash games. It's certainly optimal. But I'm going to want to get two of those three receivers in my cash games for sure. Again, you don't have to stack as much in your cash games. You're welcome to stack, but you can get away with, playing your quarterback solo and just get as many like high profile, especially receivers in your lineup is going to be super helpful. As we scroll down a little bit, there's some receivers I like here. Like, for example, Tyler Lockett, I mentioned him. DJ Moore, I'm probably not playing DJ Moore. Tyler Lockett, Zay Flowers, Watson. These are all guys in the 6,000 mid 5K range. We see Zay Flowers 5,700, Christian Watson 5,600. I kind of think Christian Watson's more of a tournament play, whereas I think you could play Zay Flowers in cash and tournaments at that price. Anybody you like in this range?
I think there's a lot to like in the mid range actually, and I would agree with all the ones you mentioned. I think probably my favorites are Zay Flowers, again, that game. Tyler Lockett, I like his target share for Seattle, and the price seems right. And I also will mention guys like George Pickens, Terry McLaurin, no, they don't get like an overwhelming amount of targets, but in that like just over 5K range, 5.4, 5.5. I just think that's interesting and somewhat affordable. And they still could give you an upside in tournaments too. So more for tournaments, of course, but I'd add those to the mix in the mid range.
Yeah. And before we move on to tight end, I'll just add a couple of value receivers that I actually really like. I mean, I think Marquise Brown is always going to be live. He's probably a much, much better game than he did. We see Rashee Rice here at 4,700. Drake London, he's just getting a lot of looks. Like, we have to acknowledge what's actually happening with Atlanta. And he has been not only getting a lot of looks, but he's been extremely efficient with the looks. At 5,100, I don't mind that at all. I mentioned Rashee. Kendrick Bourne at 4,400. Like, look, he's just underpriced, bottom line. Wan'Dale Robinson or Slayton, if you're trying to get some involvement in that game, those are very cheap receivers at 3,700 that you could absolutely put in your line. But again, that game, you got to monitor the weather, and you have to have the guts to play that game. Tyrod Taylor at quarterback, but a Tyrod Slayton stack, Tyrod Wan'Dale stack, don't hate it if the weather's okay. Let's move over to tight end real quick. And I'll let you start with this one. You mentioned Travis Kelce. Give me a few tight ends that you like.
Yeah, if you're paying up, it's obviously Travis Kelce, of course. But, at his price, he's probably going to, and again, the context of the slate and how the other stars and studs do, he's probably going to need to get you 28, 30 plus, so that's the thing with that. Just know that going in, if you're going to pay that price, you're going to have to pick him over some of those other stud running backs and receivers. So I love him, but I probably won't do that. And that's why I mentioned guys like Pacheco. So for me, I'm paying down most likely. And for me, it's Michael Mayer. He got 6 targets last week, 75 yards. His usage has gone up each week. The last 2 weeks really gone up. So he's kind of emerging as the tight end one in Vegas. And I just think this is a great spot for him. And I honestly don't even care if he becomes kind of a tight end chalky play at that price, because it's just such a great price for potentially that amount of targets in that matchup. So I love him.
It allows you to do so much, including maybe playing 2 tight ends in your lineup, which I know is normally frowned upon, but you get Kelce and Mayer in there, and all of a sudden you're getting that price break off of Kelce, because you're putting in Mayer. Looked like an absolute stud, by the way. He's not just getting the work. He looks the part in a big way.
For sure.
I'll point out Zach Ertz at 3,200. I mean, it's hit or miss with Zach Ertz, let's be honest. Dawson Knox, another hit or miss guy, 2,900, but I don't mind the matchup there. So I think that takes care of it for tight end, because I got to say, Mayer's a guy I'm going to be jamming into lineups. It's just going to be one of those things. He'll probably be a little chalky. I'm not super bothered by it. Let's talk about, speaking of chalky, let's see if the FFT DFS winner was chalky. He had a really nice lineup. The cool thing about this tournament, by the way, is you can play chalk. Everybody, don't forget, this is only a 200-person tournament. So it's one of those things where you can get away with playing a chalky lineup. It's the 2,000 and 20,000 and 10,000 person entry lineups where you have to, maybe make a couple pivots here and there. But in this contest, you don't have to make many pivots. He had Stafford, he had Cooper Kupp. That's pretty good, even though Stafford had a very underwhelming game. DeAndre Swift, Raheem Mostert, obviously we were all on him. He was smart enough to play Amon-Ra St. Brown, and that's what really did it for him. He also played the Lions defense, which I actually loved, and I played a lot as well. Josh Downs probably should have had a better game, but didn't, but he did okay. Evan Ingram, he was okay. Jonnu Smith, I think that's an interesting play. Him and Kyle Pitts actually were pretty good. Kyle Pitts just a little bit better, but this is a great lineup. But again, in a 200-person contest, it doesn't have to be amazing, right? This is not an amazing lineup by any stretch. Meg, this has Cooper Kupp, which makes sense. Mostert, which makes sense. And his one semi-pivot was one of the best receivers in the league. He found a way to get him involved by playing Josh Downs, by playing Jonnu Smith, by playing the Lions defense. I mean, there's not much to this lineup. Good job, Skip Blaine.
Love it. Yeah, absolutely love this lineup.
So let's take a look while we have maybe a minute left. Let's take a look at my lineup. So I had a tournament lineup that really could have gone to the moon. I just needed Gardner Minshew to stop turning the ball over in the first and second half. And if he had gotten the ball to Josh Downs, the big mistake I made.
That was frustrating.
The big mistake I made here was playing Zach Ertz, because honestly, I had Kyle Pitts in almost every lineup. And for some reason, I wanted to correlate. Sometimes you over correlate, like correlating Ertz to Kyron Williams. It's fine, but I didn't need to do that. I could have just put Kyle Pitts in there. I would have won $500 more instead of this $75. I would have won about $550, something like that. But great lineup with Kyron Williams. That's how I got a piece of that Rams game. I had Kenneth Walker, Tyreek Hill. That works. Raheem Mostert, Vikings defense. I just kind of went random there, trying to fade Justin Fields a little bit. And then everything else, listen, there's nothing much to this lineup. Josh Downs is in there. Christian Kirk is in there, but if Gardner Minshew and Josh Downs had gone off in any way, this lineup shoots to near the top. So again, you don't have to do much to have a great lineup. Just get those right pieces in there. Maybe have a few variations of your lineup. Meg, that's our show. We're going to do our game by game preview soon. Meg, I'm wishing you luck on this slate. Any last words before we get out of here?
No, I kind of like the way it's breaking out. To me, it's kind of it's clear what I'm liking early in the week. So I just let your process continue and let this be the jumping point. So
I love it. Always let this be the jump off point. I absolutely love that. Tuesdays at 10:30. This is Fantasy Football Today. DFS will